Good afternoon, and welcome yet again to the League of Biblical Enthusiasts. So today, as promised, we move into discussing the creation of the King James Bible. First, in this episode, we will look into the cultural, political, and religious situation in the early 17th century of England and Europe. What were those conditions that led to the rise of the King James Bible? So, we are smack in the middle of the Protestant Reformation that had already had an 80-year history in Germany, France, Switzerland, and a 70-year history in England. King Henry VIII of England abandoned Catholicism and championed the Protestant cause in 1534. This led to the beginning in time of the Anglican Church. Following his death in 1547, Henry VIII was succeeded on the throne by his son Edward, and then by his daughters Mary Tudor, Mary I, and Elizabeth. Mary Tudor, aka Bloody Mary, also known as Mary I, was Queen of England and Ireland from July 1553 until her death in 1558. She's best known for her vigorous attempt to reverse the English Reformation, which had begun during the reign of her father, Henry VIII. Her attempt to restore the church, the property that was confiscated in the previous two reigns, was largely thwarted by the Parliament. But during her 5-year reign, she had over 280 religious dissenters burned at the stake in what has become known as the Marian persecutions. In the month following her accession to the throne, Mary issued a proclamation that she would not compel any of her subjects to follow her religion, Catholicism, but by the end of September 1553, leading Protestant churchmen, including Thomas Cranmer, John Bradford, John Rogers, John Hooper, and Hugh Latimer, were imprisoned. Around 800 wealthy Protestants, including John Fox, fled into exile, many of them to Geneva. And those who stayed behind and persisted in publicly proclaiming their Protestant beliefs became targets of heresy laws. The first executions occurred over 5 days in February 1555. John Rogers on February the 4th, Lawrence Saunders on the 8th of February, Rowland Taylor and John Hooper on the 9th of February. Thomas Cranmer, the imprisoned Archbishop of Canterbury, was forced to watch Bishops Ridley and Latimer being burned at the stake. He recanted, repudiated Protestant theology, and rejoined the Catholic faith. Under the normal process of the law, he should have been absolved as a repentant, but Mary refused to reprieve him. On the day of his burning, he dramatically withdrew his recantation. In total, 283 were executed, most by burning. These public burnings proved so unpopular that even powerful churchmen disapproved. Nonetheless, Mary persevered with that policy, which continued until her death. These persecutions generated anti-Catholic and anti-Spanish feeling among the English people. The victims became lauded as martyrs, and their stories soon retold in Fox's Book of Martyrs, first published in 1563 by John Day. In 1557, Mary again thought she was pregnant, with a baby due in March 1558. She decreed in her will that her husband would be the regent, but no child was born, and she was forced to accept that her half-sister Elizabeth would be her lawful successor. Mary became weak and ill in May 1558. She was possibly suffering from ovarian cyst or uterine cancer and died on November 17th, 1558 at the age of 42. She was succeeded by Elizabeth. Elizabeth I, Queen of England, sometimes referred to as the Virgin Queen, was the last of the 5 monarchs of the House of Tudor. During Mary's reign, Elizabeth was imprisoned for nearly a year on suspicion of supporting Protestant rebels. One of her first actions as queen was the establishment of an English Protestant church, of which she became the supreme governor. This Elizabethan religious settlement was to evolve into the Church of England, and it was expected that Elizabeth would marry and produce an heir. However, despite numerous courtships, she never produced an heir. In her government, she was more moderate than her father and half-siblings had been. One of her mottos was, "I see and keep silent." In religion, she was relatively tolerant and avoided systematic persecutions, as did her sister. After the short reign of England's previous 2 rulers, her 44 years on the throne provided welcome stability for the kingdom and helped to forge a sense of national identity. Queen Elizabeth II of recent memory reigned into her 70th year as a way of comparison. In March 1603, Elizabeth fell sick and remained in a settled and unremovable melancholy and sat motionless on a cushion for hours on end. She died on the 24th of March 1603 at Richmond Palace between 2 and 3 in the morning, and a few hours later, the council set their plans in motion, proclaiming James VI of Scotland as the new King of England. James Charles Stuart, King of Scotland, as James VI, became King of England and Ireland as James I, from the union of the Scottish and English crowns on the 24th of March 1603, and he reigned until his death in 1625. In 1603, he succeeded the last Tudor monarch of England and Ireland, Elizabeth I, who died childless. James continued to reign in all 3 kingdoms for 22 years, a period known as the Jacobean era, until his death in 1625. Under James, the golden age of Elizabethan literature and drama continued, with writers such as William Shakespeare, John Donne, Ben Jonson, and Sir Francis Bacon contributing to a flourishing literary culture. Religiously, there were 3 main parties in England: Catholics, who under James were a minority, Anglicans, an ever-growing group, and Puritans, also an increasing minority. There were tensions among all 3 groups that James had to deal with during his reign. In 1603, while he was on his way to England to claim the English throne, he was met by a group of Puritans who presented him with a petition for church reforms they hoped that he would address. This document is known as the Millenary Petition. The document assured the king of their devotion and best wishes for a long reign, and the Puritans were eager for more radical church reforms that had been possible under Elizabeth. The Puritans rejected the following ceremonies of the church: the crowning or the signing of the cross during baptism. They rejected confirmation. They rejected the administration of baptism by lay people. It was common in some areas that midwives could even baptize children. They rejected the use of the wedding ring in marriage. They rejected bowing at the name of Jesus. They rejected the requirement that the clergy should wear the surplice and cap. And they also rejected the practice of giving men multiple ecclesiastical positions, receiving pay for each. James wanted to appear, at least outwardly, to seriously regard the concerns of the Puritans. So he convened the Hampton Court Conference in 1604 to discuss concerns over church policies and practices, to consider some of the complaints of the Puritans. While the meeting was originally scheduled for November 1603, an outbreak of the plague meant it was postponed until February 1604. There were 3 meetings over a period of 5 days. During the conference, the Puritans, led by John Reynolds as spokesperson, directly questioned James about their grievances. Reynolds was the president of Corpus Christi College at Oxford University, and almost every request brought forward by Reynolds was immediately denied or disputed by King James. At some point during the course of Reynolds' pleading, he made a request that only one translation of the Bible be declared authentical and read in the church. King James readily agreed to this new translation. Now, why would he do so? Well, a couple of reasons have been suggested. Number one, King James disliked the Geneva Bible, which downplayed the divine rights of kings in its translation and also in its marginal notes. Number two, the idea of a new Bible, worked on by both the Puritans and the Anglican parties, would keep them busy for the next several years and possibly lead to more agreement among them and therefore religious peace and toleration in the kingdom. Now, side note, let's go back to Constantine the Great in 325 when he called the Council of Nicaea in an attempt to bring about theological and political harmony to a divided empire. Sounds very similar to this situation, where the king, in an attempt to bring together 2 divisive parties, was hoping a compromise could be reached, greater toleration and understanding would prevail, and therefore a greater unity among the people in the kingdom. So these are some of the cultural and religious factors leading up to the King James Bible. We have moved to the point of the Hampton Court Conference, and King James will call together scholars from various forces and colleges and universities to work together over a period of several years to produce a new translation of the Bible. Our next episode, we will go into detail on who were these people who translated the King James Bible. What were their qualifications? What compromises must they work out? What was the final result of their translation, and was it received by the king and by the people? Lots to do, lots to talk about, much to cover. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts. Until next time.